The very next day, right after they relocated to the Star City Villa area, the protagonist's uncle was utterly shocked by the non-stop arrival of visitors bearing gifts since early morning. It felt as though their front door was about to wear out from the endless knocking. The protagonist's aunt pointed out that their new neighbors were all wealthy and influential figures, emphasizing that they must ensure they do not cause any embarrassment for the protagonist in the future. Out by the front door, as the protagonist greeted the massive crowd of neighbors, one of them offered a warm smile and invited the protagonist to visit their home whenever there was time, promising they would always be welcome. Another neighbor boasted about their family owning many rare and unique toys, confidently asserting that the protagonist would definitely drop by for a visit soon. The protagonist could only force a smile and agree, replying that a visit would definitely happen once an opportunity presented itself. The moment everyone finally left, the protagonist slumped onto the sofa and let out a heavy sigh. Leaning back, the protagonist could not help but reflect on how dealing with insincere people was far more exhausting than battling monsters or dedicating time to cultivation. At the very least, everyone was gone now, which was necessary since there was a trip to Stargazing Lake planned for this afternoon. A few hours later, as afternoon arrived, the protagonist reached the martial artist base and found an immense crowd gathering there. Looking around, the protagonist wondered why the base was so packed. Based on what was known, ever since the anomaly occurred at Stargazing Lake, shouldn't everyone be crowding around that area instead? Before long, a particular group of martial artists caught the protagonist's attention. One of them was asking when the Tier 3 and Tier 4 martial artists who arrived for Stargazing Lake would finally leave, noting that Tier 1 martial artists like themselves no longer had the courage to venture outside. Another quickly agreed, pointing out that if those powerful figures decided to rob them, they would have absolutely no way to fight back due to their lack of strength. Meanwhile, up on the second floor of the martial artist base, Yi Feng's uncle, Yi Qi, was staring out the window. After a brief moment, frustration crept into his voice as he questioned the man sitting on the sofa, demanding to know if he was absolutely certain that the protagonist killed his nephew. The man replied that it was completely natural for him to know, stating he was 100% sure. Upon hearing that response, the man noticed Yi Qi's disrespectful tone, prompting him to stand up immediately and stomp his foot violently against the floor. At that exact instant, Yi Qi began to tremble and fell to his knees under the immense pressure unleashed by the man. A terrifying aura enveloped the man's body as he spoke in a freezing tone, ordering Yi Qi to address him with proper respect, noting that at the very least, he should know how to say sir. Shaking all over, Yi Qi bowed his head and instantly acknowledged his mistake, begging the man for forgiveness. The scene then shifted to Stargazing Lake, where countless martial artists were waiting around the perimeter of the water. At that same moment, the protagonist was hiding behind a massive tree. While secretly observing the martial artists, the protagonist quickly realized that the crowd consisted entirely of Tier 2 and Tier 3 martial artists, with even a few Tier 4 martial artists currently cultivating right in front of the lake. The protagonist began to contemplate the situation, remembering that the creature scheduled to appear at Stargazing Lake was merely a Tier 2 multi-attribute ferocious beast. Yet, looking at this gathering, it was clear that areas with higher-level ferocious beasts attracted an even more overwhelming number of experts. Suddenly, one of the martial artists guarding the lake shouted out, claiming to have noticed movement in the water, which instantly drew everyone's attention. Not long after, a powerful current erupted from the lake as a massive creature rapidly rose from the depths. The protagonist was utterly shocked upon seeing the monster emerge. It was a star-spotted giant fish, a beast at the initial stage of Tier 3. The moment it surfaced, it let out a ferocious roar and immediately began gathering its power, causing a blue energy beam to gradually form inside its massive jaws. Seeing this, several martial artists panicked and began shouting for everyone to run, warning that the creature was preparing a dual-attribute water cannon. However, some remained completely unfazed. One of them even questioned why they should flee, arrogantly pointing out that it was merely a Tier 3 fish while boasting about his own status as a Tier 4 martial artist. He jumped into action right away, conjuring an rock defensive wall to block the oncoming strike. Yet, the exact moment the behemoth unleashed its water cannon, the conceited martial artist took a direct hit and was sent flying through the air. Watching this unfold, the protagonist immediately realized something critical. The dual attribute move of this Tier 3 ferocious beast was not just exceptionally powerful, it had easily shattered the defenses of a Tier 4 Earth attribute martial artist and even managed to severely wound him. Shortly after, another overconfident martial artist rushed forward to confront the giant fish. As he leapt into the air, He yelled out that he had been waiting in that area for half a month, and this was his very first time encountering a dual-attribute ferocious beast. Unleashing his full strength, he delivered a powerful uppercut while screaming at the monster to get out of the water. The sheer force of his attack successfully slammed the giant fish onto the shore. Upon seeing this, the rest of the martial artists moved instantly. Some shouted to claim the fish for themselves, while others declared that whoever grabbed it first would own it. Merely a minute later, after they had completely skinned and carved up the massive creature, several of them began swearing in deep disappointment. The fish was entirely empty inside. They had falsely assumed that a hidden treasure would be waiting within its belly. The protagonist was deeply disillusioned by the scene, unable to believe that a Tier 3 dual-attribute ferocious beast had been turned into sashimi in just 60 seconds. To the protagonist, these Tier 4 martial artists were far too ruthless, and staying here among them would mean leaving with absolutely nothing. Suddenly, the protagonist froze, sensing a strange presence lurking nearby, and it was coming from directly behind. An assassin was preparing to strike. Reacting instantly, the protagonist utilized spiritual telekinesis to briefly paralyze the attacker's movements. Capitalizing on that split second, the protagonist swiftly dodged and managed to evade the devastating blow. The attacker immediately realized that the protagonist was a spirit master, while the protagonist simultaneously deduced that the assailant was a Tier 4 martial artist. Wasting no time, the protagonist immediately executed the flying swan starling cloud step to rapidly create some distance, highly aware that a Tier 4 assassin had just attempted a sneak attack. If spiritual telekinesis had not been used to slow down the strike earlier, death would have been certain. While fleeing at high speed, the protagonist suddenly looked in another direction and noticed a group of people rushing toward the area. One of them could be heard shouting to their leader, expressing how they had severely underestimated the target and wondering how their boss's sneak attack could possibly fail. Quickly counting the incoming threats, the protagonist noted there were 6 more individuals, and all of them were Tier 3 martial artists. Furious, the leader barked at his subordinate to shut up. The leader then informed everyone of a crucial piece of information, revealing that the kid was actually a spirit master. When the protagonist assessed the group flanking the boss, it became clear that there were 7 of them in total, and every single one was a Tier 3 martial artist. Combined, more than a dozen Tier 3 assassins and a Tier 4 assassin had been deployed just to eliminate a mere Tier 2 martial artist like him. He continuously maintained the flying swan starling cloud step while his mind raced. Even the Star City Lord would find it difficult to mobilize this many high-level people all at once, leaving the protagonist to wonder when exactly he had crossed paths with such an overwhelmingly powerful force. Meanwhile, the assassins were utterly shocked, questioning how a kid could possibly move this fast. Before long, one of them recognized the specific movement martial art being used, identifying it as the A-rank flying swan starling cloud step. The boss immediately ordered them to keep up the pursuit, commanding his crew to torment the target until death. He arrogantly questioned whether a Tier 2 martial artist could genuinely compete with them in terms of stamina. Hearing this, the protagonist smirked, silently asking himself who actually intended to compete with them in stamina. In the very next instant, he seamlessly merged spiritual telekinesis with the flying swan starling cloud step, forging an entirely new technique, the telekinetic flight flying swan starling cloud step. Under the influence of this combination, he leapt up swiftly and took flight directly into the air. Seeing this, the assassins cursed in unison, completely unable to believe their eyes. A Tier 2 martial artist was actually flying, which was far too absurd for them to accept. They felt deeply humiliated that despite their massive numbers, they still failed to bring down a single Tier 2 martial artist. After covering a distance of several dozen kilometers, the protagonist finally managed to pull away completely. By this point, however, he was panting heavily, with his vitality nearly depleted and his spirit pushed to the absolute limit of exhaustion. Right now, his only remaining reliance was his powerful overlord body. He would have to depend entirely on the sheer endurance and strength of his physical form to run even further. As he kept running, he questioned once more who truly wanted him dead. In his mind, there was a strong probability that Yi Feng's uncle, Yi Qi, was behind this, even though he was merely a Tier 3 martial artist. If the entire Yi family had poured an enormous amount of wealth into this, it was highly possible for them to hire this many Tier 3 assassins. The protagonist felt confident in his ability to kill those dozen or so Tier 3 assassins, but the real issue was the Tier 4 martial artist. If he prioritized killing the Tier 3 opponents first, the Tier 4 assassin would definitely seize the opportunity to launch a fatal sneak attack. Conversely, if he targeted the Tier 4 martial artist first, he would undoubtedly get wounded, allowing the remaining assassins to surround and finish him off. The only viable exception was if he could wipe out all the Tier 3 martial artists in an incredibly fast manner. Gathering 3 distinct attributes simultaneously in his hand, he silently pondered the strategy. If he poured every ounce of his available power into a single strike, he could definitely finish off that Tier 4 martial artist. Meanwhile, after the protagonist managed to escape, the assassin boss was shaking with pure rage. In a fit of intense fury, he struck a massive boulder, splitting it cleanly down the middle. He fumed that according to the information provided to them, the target was supposed to be a mere Tier 2 martial artist with strength comparable to Tier 3, demanding to know why no one informed them that he was also a Tier 2 spirit master. One of his subordinates quickly replied, noting that if the protagonist managed to escape all the way back to Star City, they would all undoubtedly be dead. They added that it was not just them, noting that even their lord would never dare to expose himself and attack the protagonist inside the city. Another individual spoke up, warning that if their lord discovered they had failed this mission, they would all undoubtedly be finished. Furious, the boss barked at everyone to shut up before coldly stating that if the protagonist did return to Star City, it would only mean a faster death. Suddenly, their conversation was cut short as a new group arrived. Upon approaching, they told the assassins not to be so angry, explaining that the protagonist had only revealed his identity as a Tier 2 spirit master yesterday, so the provided information simply had not been updated in time. However, they mentioned that luck was still on their side since they had people stationed at every location where an anomaly existed. They planned to surround the entire area with their men to enforce a complete lockdown, concluding that if they still failed to kill the protagonist after all of that, they would have no choice but to simply wait for death. The leader replied that he owed this man a favor, agreeing that it was a good idea to tighten the blockade around the perimeter because he intended to personally tear that kid to pieces. The man ignored the comment and instead looked down at a device he was carrying, which closely resembled a large compass. After examining the apparatus, he informed his companions that they were still not receiving any response from that location. Consequently, he immediately issued a new order for them to move on to the next site. The following day, while the protagonist was busy slaying a ferocious beast, the assassins who had been pursuing him for so long tracked him down once again. Yet, even on that occasion, he managed to escape their grasp. By the 4th day, their paths crossed yet again. The moment the assassin boss spotted him, he rushed forward and unleashed a full-powered strike, but the protagonist dodged swiftly and once again slipped through their encirclement. By the 7th day, the assassins located him yet again. This time, he was by the side of a tree relieving himself. Before the assassin who spotted him could call out to the others, the protagonist moved instantly, launching a full-strength counterattack. As he kicked his opponent, he furiously demanded to know why the man was peeking at him while he was urinating, cursing at him repeatedly in the process. At that point, intense exhaustion and a severe lack of sleep were written all over the protagonist's face. For 7 days straight, he had been running non-stop just to survive, fighting and killing ferocious beasts while constantly evading the assassins. Even with the resilience of his overlord body, he could barely handle the immense strain. Before long, the protagonist made his way to the Star City official supply stronghold. After an agonizingly long escape, he had finally made it back safely. However, as he walked through the area, his mind felt heavy. Despite the risks, he had no other choice but to go to the official supply point just to get a single night of rest, reasoning that those people would probably not go so far as to launch a direct attack inside official territory. As he continued walking, he suddenly felt strange gazes locked onto his direction, causing him to stop in his tracks. He quickly realized that his location had been compromised, and based on the situation, it was crystal clear that the person orchestrating his death was none other than Yi Chi from the martial artist base.
The chapter ends here. Watch out for our upcoming uploads. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and click the notification bell so you'll always be updated on our future videos.